the pixels of your face like are very unique, right? And so I think a big worry is you can kind of start creating people's faces. Let's say I'm the CEO of the world, I would probably just want it to be open, because I think ultimately openness wins out, unless it's something super crazy like nuclear weapons or whatever. And so maybe they found like a nuclear weapon in their image thing. I don't know. I can't say, right?
Hello. How's it going, Brad?
Hey. Good. Still here in Berlin.
Oh, how's the weather?
I always joke because I always call weather like the lowest common denominator of conversation. And I always say like, yeah, but the weather is fine.
Wonderful. Well, I only ask because all over the world, people are experiencing these summer temps that are scorchers. And I'm over here in San Francisco. It's a high of like 66 today. So I try to be cognizant of other people. But today...
I see. We have air conditioner, so the outer temperature... It's not as important as it used to be.
Just working hard indoors. Cool. Today we're going to jump into some AI news, as we often do, and we've got some bangers. To kick it off, let's talk about AI going mad. We've got a very intriguing paper headline. Generative AI goes mad when trained on AI created data over 5 times. So kick it off. Like, what is AI training, just for some ground level understanding here? What is this about?
Yes, good question. And I think this paper is getting a lot of media coverage because it's a really good title, right? It's like self-consuming generative models go mad. It's like made for clickbait. So whoever wrote the title like clearly is also good at marketing.
Do you
PR.
Think that with this AI, like people are talking about research papers more than I've ever seen in my life, like on YouTube? And do you think this AI like situation has turned people's attention to these papers more? Like that the researchers would even be thinking about something like that?
Definitely. I do live in a bubble. So my bubble, we've always read research papers, but what I'm seeing now is like investors and just random YouTube videos are covering machine learning papers, which is wild. So definitely. Yeah. So this paper, while a very new headline and kind of applying this to LLMs, or this is not a large language models, but these are generative models. It's a very old result, and I actually wrote a blog post about this like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, or I think maybe even before that. So we'll cover this in kind of the context of this is kind of a well-known problem, but I think it's being rebranded for diffusion models and these generative models in general. So what is a generative model? What's going mad? Why is it self-consuming? So a generative model is something that can generate something based on some kind of input. So we're familiar with LLMs that are generative models. So you can ask it a question and then it'll generate text. But you can also ask it something, it can generate an image. So if you've used Stable Diffusion or any of these diffusion models, you've undoubtedly experienced that. And so that's a generative model. Self-consuming means that they use the output of generative models to train other generative models. So this is known as training these models using synthetic data. And so that's what self-consuming means, generative models. And then MAD is an analogy of model autophagy disorders. So
it's a good one.
Autophagy,
it's a good one.
Yeah. Autophagy, what that means is it's usually used in a health context that if you don't eat a lot, your body undergoes autophagy where it cleans out a lot of these, let's say, cells that are old or not performing well. Sometimes you use it as fuel. And so those are what the words mean. So let's just go into what it actually means. And so what they're raising here is that there's a worry about how we train these models and in particular, what kind of data we use to train these models. And so what you see here is what you do is you take this and you input it into the next one, you input it into the next one, and you input it into the next one. And let me zoom in here. And what you can see is this first one, like maybe has some wrinkles there, but it's a fairly good image. Same with this guy. When we get to the second one, well, it's still a good image, but you notice some visual aberrations and distortions in there. And then as you get to timestamp 5, 5, this guy's just starting to look crazy. There's some obviously weird things going on, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you get here, it just starts getting crazy. And so you see the same thing here. And so what's happening is as you feed images, is you feed the output of images into the input, then these artifacts, as they call it, become amplified. And so why is this important? Well, they talk about this in the paper, but essentially, so they say today's large-scale image training data sets contain synthetic data from generative models. And so they say, okay, this is kind of a crazy result. It's actually something we've known about for quite a while in the context of other machine learning models. But I think the importance of this is they're just calling out, hey, all this data we think is really high quality. A lot of it is synthetic data. And so if we're using machine learning models to train other machine learning models, well, we have to be aware of this model autophagy effect so that we don't get weird models that do what you saw above. So that's kind of the overview of that.
Right, that makes sense. The question that pops into my head is if people stop creating content or AI generated content increasingly dilutes human created content, how will that impact the ability of models to get better in the future? And also, so part two of the question would be, as the models get better, will the problem get worse, or could it be solved? Like if the synthetic outputs become so good, could it eliminate the problem?
Yeah, right. So let me just, I had already forgot your first question, but I think you were saying if people limit their creativity, but let me just handle one at a time. So the interesting thing is they have this diagram here where they call it fresh real data and fixed real data. And then you have this synthesized with bias. And so you have this training data set, generates a model and adds this data in there. And so if you frame this in terms of what you were saying with people generating data, so you could say, for example, that a human has fresh real data that they insert into a prompt and they try to create something out of it, and then if they continue to use that output in there, well, so the question is it depends. If you just kind of take this fully synthetic augmentation loop, will you get these results? There's actually ways to overcome this, and there's actually something we do at Super AI as well. But I'm not as worried about the one with the human input, because you're injecting kind of this fresh data. The humans are selecting images that don't look weird. And so it's kind of breaking this amplification loop. Where this becomes really a problem is when it just a purely synthetic, when it just purely feeding back into itself, it amplifies the samples that are outside of the core distribution. So anomaly samples. But you can cure it by inserting some kind of noise or inserting real data, whether it's fixed or fresh data, or debiasing the samples. So I think this paper is not that there's not a solution to this. It's just that it's important that we're aware of it.
Right. And so does this problem exist even if none of the data is synthetic, in that there could be the reinforcement of bias that exists in data that was just created by people?
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually a pretty old problem. I guess we published this blog post in 2019. It was called The 7 Costly Surprises of ML. Part 6 was feedback loops. And so in machine learning, it's really important to be aware of feedback loops. I mean, just think of the game of telephone if you played that. So the game of telephone is one person tells a story, like I walked up the mountain and found some blueberries and they were tasty. And then usually it's a longer story. And then someone tells a story, I think he said, I walked up a madman and found blueberries and they were tasty. And then it's like he walks with a madman and found 2 cherries. Like, and so there's these little errors that kind of get amplified. And if there's no error correction, means you get something that kind of is crazy in the end. So there's different types of feedback loops, and you can read this blog post if you're interested in. But there's things like, for example, direct feedback loops, where like the model makes a prediction and then that gets fed directly back into the model, either with some kind of human feedback. There's hidden feedback loops where, let's say, a model predicts something and then that gets consumed, and then somewhere down the line it gets fed back into the model. These can be very dangerous, and it's not just something new to generative models. This is something that's kind of been well known for a while. So yeah.
So I guess kind of with the proliferation of this generative AI and the public consciousness kind of becoming a lot more aware of it, we're seeing these issues that were previously the concerns of more technical folks kind of becoming part. I guess it's good, right? Because you have these kind of important, complex ideas, but they're like bubbling up to the surface. And it's like, hey, everybody, did you see that new paper? And Brad over here is like, oh, yeah, I heard about that one back in 2019 when I wrote about the exact same thing. But no, it's really interesting.
No, it's a good point you raised. Like, there's a lot of these things that we've been thinking about for a long time. Like, this is something, even in the first company I started, was a huge thing we needed to debias and get rid of these unstable amplifying feedback loops. But these things are still a problem in the big models, and it's good that people become aware of it as this becomes more and more a bigger part of society.
Absolutely. We're going to have to partner on an updated blog together.
Yeah.
Addressing feedback loops in 2023. Cool. Well, I think we can kind of jump to the next one now if you feel good about it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the next bit we've got is Meta introducing Llama 2. And to kick this off, Brad, what is Llama? You know, I know you can see him at the zoo, but we're talking about something else here, aren't we?
Yeah. So as you can see in the screen, this is from Meta, and in particular Meta AI. And the original Llama was just something amazing, because every time we use these large language models, for example, Chat-GPT or Google's Bard, well, they're behind a paywall and they're closed source, meaning you can't access the actual model, which limits your creativity of what you can do. And so the first Llama was amazing because it was released as open source and people did incredible things with it. Llama was the seed that grew many incredible projects. And so Llama 2 is the second version of this. And as you can see, it was trained on more data, has double the context length. And I think most importantly is it's available for commercial use. So there's a lot of people using Llama for a ton of different things. It was just a Cambrian explosion of projects I was seeing come out, and people were building things on top of Llama. It was just a really cool thing that Meta did. And this one's even better. And yeah, you can use it for commercial use. And so not only is this just amazing for the world, amazing for the open source community, amazing for businesses, I think it's a very smart business move in addition. So by them releasing this, well, it's not as good as ChatGPT 4, but it's starting to commoditize that. I mean, 70 billion parameters, which doesn't sound like a lot in today's world, but they trained it so efficiently that the performance is actually quite great. And as I was saying, I think this is a smart move by Meta, a smart business move, because providing AI models and APIs to AI models is not their core business, right? They have Facebook, they have Instagram, they have WhatsApp, their VR stuff. And so it's kind of smart just to release this and in a way commoditize OpenAI's business. And so I think it's a pretty genius move. Yeah, I mean, I'm an investor in Meta. Yeah, I'm accepting percentage of my net worth in Meta. So I'm probably a bit biased, but I think it's a great idea.
Appreciate that transparency. Yeah, I think I remember hearing that like it's free to use for commercial purposes up to some like absurd limit of like, I don't know, 700 million calls or something like this. So I guess they're thinking if some big company wants to use it, then they kind of want to get paid, but at least they're making that available to everyone. However, I guess it's somewhat of a contentious decision for them to kind of just give this away, because you know, maybe a contrarian might say that, well, you're letting loose this thing that has this dangerous potential into the wild, and anybody could grab hold of it and leverage it for, you know, bad intentions. And I've heard Mark Zuckerberg say in interviews that, like, you know, this is a valid concern, but also these models, you know, in a relative to human capabilities, human intellect, they're still fairly nascent and early on. And this is definitely something we need to be concerned about as they get closer to that human-like intelligence. intelligence. But I'd be curious to hear, like, where do you stand on the debate? Like, let it be out there, let it be open source, or keep it internal and keep it safe, but then limit the ability for others to kind of innovate with it.
I'm 100% on the side of giving the power to the people. So I think it's less important what my beliefs are and more important why, or like the reasoning behind that. So what's interesting is when I hear Sam Altman go on the talks and he talks about this, he has the same opinion essentially as that, but they don't actually open source it because I think it would just be done for their business model and not allow them to make so much money to make the product better. But the idea is no matter what context we look at it in, whether it's AI safety or product development or understanding, what happens is AI is powerful. We're living in a new world because of AI, but it's not yet AGI. It's not yet at the point where it's smarter than humans and it's taking over everything. And so I think the idea is when you release this in its baby form and we learn how to handle a baby or maybe it's a toddler, whatever age you want to say it is, then it becomes so much safer. And not only just safety as in alignment, research, but also in terms of general understanding. Like if no one knew it was not a bad idea to jump off cliffs or whatever, well, cliffs would be super dangerous, but because like people tried that at some point and died. And so when the stakes are low, it's really good idea to make mistakes. And so right now the stakes are low. And so releasing it, people are going to make a lot of mistakes and there is going to be a lot of problems and people are going to use it for nefarious actions. And things are going to break and there is going to be some bad things. But I would rather that the bad people using it attack someone, the good people learn how to defend it, and people make mistakes. People learn that it can reproduce someone's face and voice and all these things so that the public has an awareness of how they can be fake, how bad things can happen with AI before, and then it builds up to the AGI level. And so not only that perspective, but just when you release, humans are amazing. And especially technology, which may be the last technology we invent, it just seems morally right to put it in the public, even though there's going to be bad people. But there's also going to be good people who are going to do great things, and there's going to be good people trying to stop the bad people. And so I'd rather have, like, if we just look at the history, somehow I think, because, like, I don't think it's that in movies the good person wins usually, and that, like, I think there's a reason why movies are like that and why they're archetypal and why we enjoy them, because something about morality or doing good seems to motivate us more and seems to add more power and seems to win out overall. So anyway, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a compelling argument. And do you think it would be fair to say perhaps we will more effectively and efficiently discover the edges, discover the danger zone if more people are out there with access to it and they can experiment and learn and as you said, there's good actors out there that would go and report those findings and share those with people. And I think it can be hyper focused on bad actors or the negative side of things, and you can completely ignore the fact that, well, there's a flip side here, and there's all kinds of people and all kinds of intentions. And I think, my own life experience, most people aren't malicious and coming at everything from this terrible place where they just want to create chaos. I mean, a lot of people have good intentions and they want to help make things better. So I think it is like really important that we kind of look at both sides and don't get too focused just on like one outcome. And it can be hard too to for me to keep in mind that it's in its infancy, it could be a lot more dangerous than it currently is.
I like to provide counterpoints as well. So if I were to ask myself another question, it would be like, okay, well, when would you limit it? So you discussed the cases when I mentioned that I wouldn't, but so for example, to use an analogy, maybe to even take one step back. So when I'm making a decision, I will only make the decision if I'm willing to deal with the consequences of the worst case scenario that could happen, right? If I'm not willing to deal or can't deal with, or the kind of worst case scenario is too destructive, then I actually won't engage in that. And so I think I would follow the same here as well. So let's say they invented like some nuclear thing. Do I think we should give everybody nuclear bombs? Well, no, because the problem is even if 99.9999999% of people are good and there's one bad person that puts a nuclear bomb on other people, well, that's really, really bad, right? Or do I think everyone should have access to uranium? Or do I think everyone should have access to like bazooka guns or tanks or stuff. Like, no. So I think there's a limit when kind of the AI becomes unbelievably powerful and could really somehow destroy the world or kill millions and millions of people, or there's these like military robots flying around. And so let's say I was just making the policy now, what I would say is like, okay, if you're using above a certain number of parameters or a certain amount of compute or a certain amount of data, well, you're going to need to kind of register somewhere that you're doing this. So that like it's kind of like a classic KYC, or if you're doing Bitcoin transactions, or if you send a lot of money somewhere, well, you just need to kind of register that. And so I think there needs to be limits, but I think in terms of Llama 2 and probably even GPT-4 and like, I think getting it out there is good, because let's say there was baby nuclear bombs that didn't really hurt people. People learn how to handle that or store the waste or whatever. Then I would also say, hey, like let's bring that out there. And yeah, and if there's like little guns that don't really hurt people, but if there's like, I think you need some kind of registration if you need a bazooka.
Yeah, I mean, one question I have on that is like, so does it require to some extent that the creator, in this instance Meta, like does it require that Meta understands reasonably well the capabilities and limitations before they give public access to the model?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to a healthcare company. Like there needs to be some kind of safety before you start giving it to people, right? If you're just like, we have this new drug and all of a sudden it kills a bunch of people, well, that's not right. But yeah, I mean, if you read the paper, they did do a lot of testing, and then they're responsible, they call it, like you can see it there, the safety red teaming and the responsible use guide. So definitely anytime you give something to someone, like I would never give a child like huge machete or like a chainsaw. Like, so I don't think it should just be like, just give everything all the time without checking it. Like it is a tool like anything else. And I always default to giving power to the people, and like libertarianism and laissez-faire ideologies, but there are limits, right? In my opinion. And I think they have some pretty good limits. Like you have to sign up, you can only download it for 24 hours, and then you can only download it 5 times. And so what's cool is they release different versions. They have like a 6 billion parameter, 70 billion parameter chat versions, non-chat versions, and it works quite good. I'm really impressed. Like I'll show you a response here. So we asked it, tell me about Super AI, the company. And so this wasn't the chat one, so it's doing the complete. Oh, I mean, this is sure. I'd happy to tell you about Super AI. Super AI is a cutting-edge AI development company that's focused on creating intelligent systems that can help solve some of the world's most pressing challenges. The company is founded by a team of experienced AI researchers. So on and on and on, but it does a pretty good job. And I was like, hey, come up with a pitch, and it did a good job. And this is just the 7 billion parameter model, the 71 or 6 or something. The 70 billion ones even better. So it's just amazing that we can get that for free, and it's so powerful. And I've been playing with it, and it gives really good results. I'm really impressed.
That's awesome. It's really fun to continually track these trends and kind of see how they evolve. Like we're doing this podcast weekly, and we always just have some new input kind of to help, I don't know, just expand the conversation. And it's so dynamic, which, speaking of, I think we've got one more we can squeeze in if you're feeling good to move forward.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this next one is kind of more headliney, less maybe, concrete details. So we might be speculating a little bit here, but the headline is OpenAI holding back GPT-4 image features on fears of privacy issues. So to kick it off, I mean, this is talking about a multimodal version of GPT-4. And for the audience, could you explain what is a multimodal version of GPT-4 and why is it important for users?
Yeah, so multimodal just means it uses multiple senses in its inputs and outputs. So we as humans are familiar with our 5 senses, or maybe you can call it 6 senses, but so we obviously see things, we taste things, we smell things, we hear things, we think things, and so those are different modalities by which we experience the world. And so large language models have one modality, text, but you can imagine that the training data that you get with text is limited. Text is really great because it abstracts a lot of things, and we've seen how good it works. But it's hard for it's hard to communicate some things in text, right? Like a baby or something sees this, or if I drop the water, like there's just a lot of things that you don't even think to describe in text, right? Like you can understand a lot about physics by just observing things in the world, and two balls clinking together and how water falls, but you wouldn't quite understand that from text. Maybe there's some textbook that talks about like Newton's laws of motion that in conservation of momentum. So if I said I have a ball of 1 kilogram going at 1 meter per second, another ball of 2 kilogram going at 1 meter per second, like so it could probably answer that, but that's different than an intuitive understanding of what it looks like a kid learns. And so it's not only important for that because you get more information, but it's also important because there's an error correcting and an harmonious aspect to multimodality. So if I hear someone like go, and then I see them go, like I can use both of those signals to kind of help reinforce each other, right? And so it becomes really powerful because you kind of have this 1 + 1 = 3 type of effect where they're not just completely independent, they build off of each other. And so it can make the models much more accurate and much more powerful and do many more things, right? Like you could say, hey, make me a movie of all the things I like, right? And then I can make a movie. Like that would just be cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I mean, when you're a kid, I anyway heard about like, what kind of learner are you? Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? It's like, well, we're giving this guy some more learning modalities, we could call it. And I know this next question might require you to do a little bit of speculation, but I do want to put it to you, like, what concerns could or does OpenAI have about releasing this multimodal version of GPT-4?
Yeah, so I don't want to speculate, but if I was releasing it, some of the concerns that would come up to me is, okay, if you have text, like what kind of personally identifiable or dangerous information is text? Well, maybe there's your like address or your deepest thoughts, or I don't know, like your social security number. And so it wouldn't be good if I asked ChatGPT, I'm like, what's Chris's social security number? And it told me. That wouldn't be good, but it's pretty unlikely. And like the amount of ways you could combine things with text, like we know the words, right? There's like, let's say 25,000 to 50,000 words available, and you can combine them in multiple ways. But pixels are very different, right? Like we could combine words together, but the pixels of your face like are very unique, right? And so just to get to the point, that I think a big worry is you can kind of start creating people's faces and looking up, let's say, what people look like, what their house looks like, even pornography, right? Like it's like, oh, write a pornographic story. Well, like for young kids, like a lot of kids can't even read, so it's not dangerous. But if people start putting visual stuff out there, like that can be very harmful or very, very negative to society. So I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like having AI do images is really powerful, but it's really powerful. So I think you need to be a little bit like more careful. And we painted this continuum. We said, okay, if you made nuclear bombs, they're very powerful. Then your carefulness needs to map to its power. And if you're just releasing GPT-1, well, it's not very powerful, so you can be a little more loose about how careful you are. And so I think this maps to it, that having images or video is more powerful in a lot of ways than text, or even text plus images is more powerful. So I think you need to be a little bit more careful.
Definitely. And do you think that the massive user base has a role in this? Because one thing it makes me think of is like Hollywood, I think maybe beginning in like 2018, started using pretty regularly deepfake technology to augment films after they were created, to do voiceovers or just changed maybe the way a character looked. And at that time, it was prohibitively expensive for any average person to get access to this technology and create a believable deepfake. However, in 2023, the tables have totally turned. Like we together could pretty easily, with your technical skills, create deepfakes of each other, and like we could maybe we'll do it one time. We could switch. I could become you and you could become, we could, right? Like we could do that. And so do you think that's part of the worry? They're just like, if we give this to 100+ million people, like who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, two thoughts popped in my head. One is, I bet you talk very differently around your buddies than you would if you were like talking to 100 million people. I think you're just a little bit more careful because at 100 million people, there's very different people, and you maybe don't have the context of everybody. They don't have the context of you. There's more risk in what you say. Whereas, let's say around your friends or whatever, like you know them, you know how they would interpret things. They know you, so they could filter a lot of context and a lot of history. And if you say something really bad, they're gonna judge you. But at least 100 million people aren't gonna judge you. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is about reputation, right? So let's say there's a big company and they release some deep fake in some bad way. Well, their reputation gets destroyed, and maybe they're not going to be able to make another movie again. Whereas like when your reputation's on the line, people just behave better. And like if you can do things through anonymity, that's why you get all these crazy YouTube comments. Whereas when you're face to face with somebody, like people are just much nicer. And so, yeah, I think exactly what you said, when you transform that only the biggest entities can use it. And so they have a reputation withheld, and now everybody can use it as anonymous as they want, just kind of put it out there. And if there's pushback, well, no one knows it was them. They just release it out there. Yeah, I think the stakes rise for both of those reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Kind of my last question on this, like I saw recently Bard is multimodal, I believe now. You can interact with it using images. And so, OpenAI has kind of been the leader here for a minute, right? Like they've been out ahead of the pack. And I just wonder if, like, given how fast-paced all this is this potentially a misstep? Like, we're almost seeing, like, an inversion of the roles. Like, now OpenAI is the one that's being a little bit more cautious, and then Google's being a little bit more bullish. I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Like, is it a leapfrog moment for Google, or is OpenAI making the right move?
Yeah. So the answer is I don't know. But what I can say is it's interesting how kind of there's a bit of inconsistencies in like the spoken strategy versus the actual strategy, right? So, I mean, the whole idea of OpenAI was just to be open, right? Then they kind of closed up, but then they're more open than Google. But then now they're holding back images, and Google typically is the one that holds back because they have so much to lose, right? Like I don't blame any of them. And so now Google's a little bit faster on releasing these. And so it's kind of weird how there's not just like a clear strategy of one is just always open, because it's weird when they say, hey, we release stuff early, why it's not a problem. Why aren't they releasing the image thing early? And maybe what happens is like people's faces get faked, but then people know they're faked and they deliver technologies to do that. Or I've seen these, like if you don't know about them, then they can be convincing. But sometimes like eyebrow does a weird thing, like you can tell, especially if they have some kind of detector with it. So I don't know what the right strategy is. I always tend to prefer openness and honesty and all these things. But I do find it weird that they're kind of like flip-flopping on their strategy, and there's not a clear person that's always just releasing stuff. Maybe that's meta. And there's a person that's just holding it back and making it high quality, like Apple does that. It's not like Apple is all of a sudden releasing a bunch of shit and like iterating. Apple, we all know, is going to release, like when you buy something from Apple, you know it's going to be good. And they're not always the fastest, but you know it's going to be good. And if you, I don't know, get something, I don't know, from Tesla or whatever, you know it's going to like, they're moving so fast and they're just always releasing the latest software updates. And so they're going to move fast and eventually you're good, but you're not. But it would be weird to kind of mix those. If sometimes Apple released the junk product, but they iterated fast and eventually got good. And I feel that's what they're doing. And so maybe they just haven't figured out the strategy yet. And
yeah, that totally makes sense.
Maybe one more thing to add. Maybe it's also now OpenAI and Sam Altman, and like they're in the spotlight of all the senators and the governments around the world, and maybe just now they're kind of in the spotlight and need to be more careful.
The stakes are getting higher. I mean, it kind of makes me think about what we were talking about with Llama, where, does Meta have an obligation to be aware of the dangers prior to giving it away? And the companies, since they're not necessarily revealing all the details about how it was created, they're the best source for that type of information. So maybe now OpenAI is like, yeah, they've got all these people looking at them, and maybe they know something we don't about the potential safety and dangers of like putting this out there. So I feel we kind of have to respect the decision, right? Because it would go against sort of what we were saying previously about how you need, to me, it's like it's constantly evolving too. Each instance, we rarely get to see these changes happening so quickly. And maybe that's part of why we don't see, like, we feel there's not a clear direction because there's so much, it's so tumultuous almost.
Yeah. And I mean, like if you look at the kind of counterfactual or cost benefit analysis, like if they wait a few more months to release it, then okay, what's the downside of that? I don't know, maybe they get a bit behind. But if they release it in something bad, well, that could be really bad just from their kind of game theory perspective. But if I'm like the orchestrator of the earth, I still think it's better to release it because like, let's say something bad happens and someone gets faked or whatever. Well, this is the power of the open market. Someone's going to build a tool, even if they charge for it, to protect you because there's a value there. And if you build things valuable, you're going to get money and so whatever. So if I'm the CEO of OpenAI, like probably I would want to be careful because just the game theory dictates that. Let's say I'm the CEO of the world, I would probably just want it to be open because I think ultimately openness wins out unless it's something super crazy like nuclear weapons or whatever. And so maybe they found like a nuclear weapon in their image thing. I don't know. I can't say, right?
Yeah, only they can. Well, hey, on that note, guys, this is a great conversation, Brad. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Talk to you later. And if you guys have any thoughts, let us know.
Leave them in the comments. Like, subscribe. I know it's annoying, but we have to ask. Please do it.
All right.
Bye.
See you, Chris. Bye.